And religion is our first and worst attempt to find out what's going on. We only bother with it because it was here first. It grabbed the territory of explanation, because we are pattern-seeking mammals. We need to look for patterns in logic, and we prefer, even in times like this, many people will prefer a conspiracy explanation to no theory at all, because they need to have some explanation. Well, religion comes from the time when we didn't know there was a germ theory to explain disease. And I don't like the book of Joshua, and I don't like the injunction to kill all the Midianites down to the last child. That makes me uneasy. Well, they're out of luck. This stuff is either the word of God or it isn't. And they have to make up their minds whether they think it's that or man-made. And when they've done that, they'll feel. Who here has a cat or a dog? Just, you may wonder why I'm asking you this. Surprisingly few people, but you've all run into dogs and cats in your time. Okay? What is the worldview of the cat? The worldview of the cat? No, start with the dog. What's the worldview of the dog? The dog is given by you food, shelter, water, love, affection, and it thinks you're God. The cat is given food, warmth, shelter, and love, it thinks it's God. Religion makes the following appeal to us, which is why I say it poisons everything, because it goes to the deep nature of our self-respect and our humanity and our integrity. It makes the following bid to us. It says, you are born sinful. You're born guilty. You're guilty of crimes that were committed before you were born. You are not able to evade them. Your sin is original. You're made from dust, or in the Quran, from a clot of blood. Your Creator is not in a very good mood with you, and there's no reason why he should be, given what piece of excrement you basically are. That's the masochistic element of it. But after this thoroughgoing abjection, thoroughgoing demand that you throw aside all your self-respect, you're told there is, however, some redeeming news. The universe is designed with you in mind. The cosmos cares what happens to you. And if you will continue to abject yourself like a serf in front of God, you may hope for the forgiveness of sins, for eternal life, and for a divine plan. In other words, the maximum appeal to the abject, the servile in you, and the maximum appeal to the self-centered and the egomaniac. Not a very wholesome way to begin a discussion about the main questions, such as why are we here, who are we, what are we here for, what is the just city, how would it look like, what is the meaning of life. It's begun by a horrible lecture from a dictator. And you're then further told that if you do not bow the knee to a celestial dictatorship, unalterable, unchangeable, unappealable to, if you don't believe in that, you would have no means of telling right from wrong. How would you know how to do the right thing or avoid the wrong if you were not being told by a celestial dictatorship? Once again, an absolutely central attack on any concept that we might have of our own integrity, dignity, and self-respect. How would Huck Finn know? Admittedly, he's a fictional character, but then, so most of the people I'm going to be discussing, from Moses onwards. How does Huck Finn know that he's not to betray his friend Jim? He's not to give him back. He's not to give him up to the people who are hunting for him. How does Mark Twain know that we will like Huck when he refuses this? What does Huck know? The law is against him. The church is against him. All the preachments of religion and customary law are against him. He thinks that if he refuses the demand to give up his slave friend, he's going to go straight to hell. That's what he thinks, but he still does the right thing. As we might all hope to do, as we must all hope to do, if we were tested much less than that. It's innate in us. Religion gets its morals from us. We know what the right thing is without being told by a celestial dictatorship. If it were otherwise, this is why I say I'm an anti-theist, not an atheist. If it were otherwise, what would the situation be? Every one of our waking and sleeping thoughts would be under permanent surveillance at all times from the moment of our conception, according to some at any rate, certainly birth, until not just when we died, because that's when the real fun would begin. Now, it's as if those who wish it to be true, which I do not. You can be an atheist and wish that there was a God. Many atheists I know do wish it was true. Why do I not? Because I don't want to live in a celestial North Korea. I'm one of the few people who's been to, as a writer, to North Korea and Iran and Iraq too, to all the axis of evil countries in the last few years. When I was young and was told that this is what paradise will be like, you get to praise God all the time, forever, and continue thanking him for everything he's doing for you, sometimes with the aid of musical instruments. But that's the thing, that's what paradise will be like, everlasting praise. I used to think, sounds like hell to me. But I also wondered, what would it be like? I couldn't quite picture it. An attempt is made in the movie Bedazzled, the first version, to try and convey how ghastly it would be. Well, now I know. I've been to a state where there's worship from dawn till dusk, and thanking for everything you've got, every tiny crumb, and there's what you get, too, is the tiny crumb. Nothing but thanks, nothing but praise. It's a state where, not everybody knows this, Kim Jong-il is not the absolute dictator of North Korea. He's only the head of the party and of the North Korean army. The head of the state, the president, is his late father, who's been dead for some 15 years, Kim Il-sung. He's still the president, and he's the president, if you pardon the expression, for life, even though he's, as it were, passed on, ceased to be, joined the choir in vestibule, turned up his toes. He's an ex-president. You could call it a necrocracy. A thanatocracy, a mausolocracy. And it's also, you'll notice, just one short of a trinity, because the Son is the reincarnation of the Father. That's what it would be like if this horrible Bronze Age Palestinian myth was true. Unending, eternal, unchallengeable, unchangeable slavery. Who wants it to be true? That's my first question to myself. I'll answer it later. And to you, since I haven't got a debate partner, and to you, ladies and gentlemen, why would anyone want it to be true? If I don't remember to ask myself, isn't secular dictatorship sometimes just as bad? If I don't remember to ask myself this, promise me one of you will, because we can't skip that point. Okay. Why is it wonderful to be here in Seattle and in North America having this discussion at this moment? Because everybody in America believes that everybody else is a strong believer. Everybody believes the opinion polls that say everyone else goes to church and believes in Satan more than they believe in Darwin. Everyone else thinks you can't run for office unless you bow the knee. And this is not true, and your presence here partly materializes my belief that it isn't, as did my swing through the South, where thousands of people came to each stop and all looked around themselves thinking, God, I thought I was the only atheist in this town till I got here. We had to move out of the bookstore in North Carolina into a church to fill up the overspill. And the pastor said to me, he said, I shouldn't be telling you this. This made my day. He said, I shouldn't be telling you this. This damn church has never been this full. And North Carolina can be a hard row to hoe for an unbeliever, I'm here to tell you, but it's not that tough. And when I thought, because the Lord sent me the death of Jerry Falwell that week,
Religion begins by insulting human dignity. Christianity teaches that people are born guilty before they can speak, think, or choose. Romans 5:12 ties sin to all humanity through Adam, and Psalm 51:5 says a person is sinful from birth. Then the same religion claims the whole universe was made with humans in mind. That is psychological whiplash. First, you are broken and dirty. Then, you are the center of a cosmic rescue plan. The trap is obvious. Break people down with guilt, then sell obedience as salvation. Morality does not need that. Humans can know cruelty is wrong without being watched by a heavenly dictator.
And I thought, okay, I'm going to say what I think about him. And I made a few comments about the origin of his ghastly career as a segregationist and a defender of racism, about his vulgar and cheap anti-Semitism, about his mad belief that the Antichrist is with us now and is already here and is an adult Jewish male. He's trying to lay off that bet by supporting the ugliest and stupidest elements in Israel who think they can bring on the Messiah by stealing other people's property, his shakedown artistry, his lying, his failure to levitate his ghastly, tubby form into the heavens with the rapture, instead being found slumped uselessly on the floor of his office in Virginia, built on the money stolen from the credulous. And then I thought, well, I can go on in this vein for some time, but I think I really ought to say what I truly think about him. And I said, now that he's gone, I have some advice for his grieving family. Give him an enema, you can bury him in a shoebox. Good. Well, there was a brief pause, actually, because they're slower on the uptake, as you know, in the South, due to incessant offenses against chastity with members of their immediate families and domestic animals. No, we know they're much smarter than you think. Much smarter than you think. There was a brief pause, and I thought, I've gone too far. No, then the roof blew off. They really liked it. They don't want anyone thinking that they are led around by idiots like this, by moral cretins of this kind. I think the zeitgeist is changing, ladies and gentlemen. I really do think it's happening, and we should be proud to be a part of it. Turn a page of your newspaper any day you like. See what the parties of God are doing to Iraqi society to drag it down to the level of Afghanistan or Somalia, the last two countries where the parties of God had it all their own way. Look next door to Iran, where people who believe in a tooth fairy figure called the hidden Imam, the 12th Imam, whose immediate advent is expected, which will, it won't surprise you to hear, bring about a reign of universal peace and justice when it comes. Wonder where they picked up that idea. But perhaps as a sign of a lack of confidence in this belief, Mr. Ahmadinejad is currently building a new boulevard into the center of Tehran on which to welcome the motorcade of this Imam when he returns from his seclusion. Just in case that doesn't work or doesn't happen, why not pirate and plagiarize some nuclear weapons? They know nothing about science themselves. They couldn't do physics. They don't care about the beauties of science. The wonders of the cosmos don't appeal to them at all. But they can probably steal, have stolen, the ingredients to make a nuclear weapon. So we now have what we've long feared we're going to have, the coincidence between an apocalyptic ideology and, or rather, shall I say, a messianic ideology and an apocalyptic weapon. It's going to happen now. It'll happen very soon. Well, suck on that for a second. I've already said what the crazed messianic settlers in the neighboring or not far off West Bank are doing, and who their best friends in America are, the Falwellites and Robertson clones, who think it's amusing to try and propose that, with the help of sources I gather in Washington State, that stultifying nonsense be taught to our children in American schools in the year 2007. As equal time. So, here kids, the chemistry class is over, now get ready for the alchemy period. Astronomy's over, you'll be glad to hear. It's a hard subject, but cheer up, after the break, astrology teacher will be on the scene. What is this nonsense? How can anyone put up with it for a single second? The evil attempt to make children ignorant and frightened. That is also augmented very strongly by another priesthood, which has been teaching them about hellfire and limbo, though they've just dropped limbo at the last minute, as the Pope did recently notice. Limbo's over now. Unbaptized children don't go there forever in isolation and loneliness, after all, because they didn't get the sprinkle of water. You can relax. No, you can't. Millions of parents thought that's where their dead children had gone, ladies and gentlemen, for hundreds of years. Miserable, frightened, humiliated, upset. They believed it. It was real to them. It was cruel to tell them this nonsense to begin with. It's even more cruel to say, after all, that it's not true, but never mind. After hundreds of years of that, we have to apologize for a few other things too. The Inquisition, sorry about that. The role of the church in the final solution, maybe a mistake. The Crusades, no, we wouldn't do it the same way now. The massacre of Byzantine and Eastern Orthodox Christians, up till the very recent past in the Balkans. We owe them an apology. This is quite a lot to be taking on, isn't it? But never mind, we're getting ready to be infallible all over again. This stuff is not to be believed. And you live in a country where you don't have to, and mustn't be intimidated by the supposed strength of illusions like this or the people who peddle them. Where I was very kind to mention that I recently took my oath as an American citizen at the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C. Actually, it was on the 13th of April, which is his birthday and also mine. And I'm in a small way his biographer, and I was able to arrange to take the oath at the tidal basin by his memorial, and I made a little speech about the Virginia Statute on Religious Freedom, which is the basis of the tremendous First Amendment to our Constitution, that guarantees, as you know, that there can be no clerical meddling in our public and political life. And the shorthand phrase for that was uttered by the President in a letter that he wrote to the Baptists of Danbury, Connecticut, seeking refuge from persecution. From the Congregationalists of Danbury, Connecticut, by the way. It's who they were afraid of, in which he said there will be a wall of separation forever on this point. So I now have a new slogan for you. Mr. Jefferson, build up that wall. And I believe it's entirely possible that we can construct a cement here between what is patriotic, what is decent, what is rational, and what is not faith-based. I think it can be done. I think it can start here. Okay. Enough from me. What about my debating partner? What has he got to say to this? Well, how would you be, Mr. Hitchens, how would you be moral if it wasn't for God? How would you know what morality was? What's your warrant for saying what's right and wrong? I always politely pause at this point as if I've never heard this nonsense before. Okay, so I am wrong when I get a sense of satisfaction from giving a pint of blood. It comes from nowhere. I don't lose the pint, I get it back after a cup of tea and I lie down, but someone else gets a pint of blood they may very well need. A great little transaction, I don't do enough of it, and I have a rare blood group myself, and I might one day want the same person, or someone else rather, to do the same for me. But it's not just a utilitarian transaction. I positively enjoy doing it. Is this from nowhere? I certainly don't know of any heavenly reason why I think it. All right, if that's not good enough for you. By the way, give blood whenever you can. It's a noble thing to do, it's the right thing to do, and you may need some blood one day yourself, and you shouldn't be ashamed of the fact that this comes from human solidarity, without which we wouldn't be here in the first place or able to have a language to discuss this in. But all right, think of my Jewish ancestors, such as they were, hobbling around in the desert. I don't believe a word of the story. Even Israeli archaeology has completely and conclusively disproved the story of Exodus, as is detailed at some length in my book. There was no such presence in Egypt. There was no exile. There was no wandering. There was a lot of massacre and murder and theft, but then there always is when religious tribes are walking around. Let's assume the story is true. Let's assume it. Am I to be insulted by being told that my ancestors did not know until they got to Sinai that perjury and murder and theft were not kosher? Up till then, they thought, those are the things we like best.
Picture a child being told two completely different things in the same school. First, science teaches evidence, biology, chemistry, astronomy, fossils, testing, and proof. Then religion walks in and says, ancient stories deserve the same seat as facts. That is how ignorance protects itself. Creationism failed, so it changed the name to intelligent design. Hellfire scared children for centuries. Limbo terrified grieving parents. Then, the church quietly softened the teaching later. The damage stayed. Religion wants public power without public accountability. That is exactly why it belongs outside government, outside science class, and away from children's fear.
It's a bit of a facer to get all this way, and then do we have someone tell us that's not on anymore? No. No, we all have to, I'll repeat myself, we all have to have more self-respect than that. They wouldn't have got that far or anywhere. They would never have been written about or heard of if they'd been under any other impression. Religion gets its morality from us. We know innately. You don't have to teach a child the golden rule. You sometimes have to reinforce it a bit, but you don't have to teach the principles of it. Same with the New Testament. How do we know this? Because the story of the Good Samaritan is told by the alleged Nazarene, in whose existence I also do not believe. But he talks of a person who went out of his way on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho to help a fellow creature in need. Very obviously, this man cannot have been a Christian, because it's the young Jesus talking about him. He knows the story already. He's able to tell people that's the way you should behave if you see people in trouble. He never says you need divine permission to do this or a divine warrant to do it. It's ordinary human ethics. And to say that it wouldn't be part of us, part of our warp and our weft and our woof, if it wasn't for divine permission, is to make ourselves into serfs. So I propose we repudiate that and, as it were, stand on our own 2 feet a bit more. Now, speaking of serfdom, well, Mr. Hitchens, isn't it the case that in the last century some of the worst atrocities, if not the worst of all, were perpetrated by atheists and secularists? Is this not the fact? Very serious question. I have a whole chapter about it in my book. Shall I read it all to you? No, I won't do that. It's available at fine bookstores everywhere. And will be available after this show, where I'll be very polite to anyone who has a receipt, but not to anyone else. Someone asked me the other day, "Are you a materialist?" I said, "Are you joking?" Yes. He said, "This is America." Well, take the cases that are before us, the most notorious ones. In the case of fascism, the movement that coined the term totalitarianism, that actually put it into circulation, religion being, in my view, implicitly totalitarian with its admiration of an absolute, unchallengeable ruler, there's no other way to describe the fascist movement beginning in Spain, Portugal, Italy, spreading through Croatia, Austria, large parts of Germany, Hungary, Slovakia, except to say it was a movement of the Roman Catholic Rite. That's what it was. It was a completely Christian movement. All of its leaders were believing Christians. It had an official concordat with the Vatican. The Nazi puppet state leader of Slovakia was actually a man in holy orders. General Franco was very nearly baptized in his rule by that. Anyone can look this up. The church has never ceased to apologize for it, and nor should it. And after the war was over, they helped many of these people escape and begin constructing regimes of a similar model in South America after 1945. No wonder they can't stop apologizing. Nothing secular about that. German National Socialism, not quite the same, I have to say. It's true that the Vatican signed a treaty with Hitler the week he was installed in power. And it was for him the first and most important treaty he ever signed, the Concordat with the Vatican, and neither of them ever broke it. It's also true to say that in Mein Kampf he praises the Catholic Church and never left it, and has nothing but contempt for atheism. It's also true that the Pope ordered that his birthday, the Führer's birthday, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, be celebrated from the pulpit every year, every April, which it was, to the very end. It's also true that 25% of the members of the SS, this we know from Catholic historians, were confessing Catholics, ones who went to confession, and that no one was ever threatened with excommunication for their role in the Endlösung, as the Germans call the Shoah, or the final solution. Excommunication was only used by the church politically after the war, when you were told you'd be excommunicated if you voted for the Communist Party. And it is true that Joseph Goebbels was excommunicated from the Catholic Church. But do you want to know why? Do you know why? He's married a Protestant. Yeah. Married a Protestant. That's what it took to be. Next, you'll know he didn't eat fish on a Friday or something. No, excuse me, they have their standards, okay? But it is also true that Hitler sought to replace Christianity as the state religion and would have preferred an Aryan Nordic blood myth with himself as the centerpiece of it. There's no question about that. And that many brave Christians had to die on that proposition. No one can deny that. But there's nothing secular about National Socialism. And of the third partner in that revolting alliance, that of Japan, the leader is not just a man of God, but a God himself, for whom people were prepared to immolate themselves and others. The late Emperor Hirohito. While I'm at it, one when his son was sent to Oxford University. This is a digression, but why not? He was sent to Magdalen College in the 30s, and the Japanese embassy sent up a team of people to see the warden of Magdalen College, Oxford, to say, are you sure you're ready to receive the Crown Prince? They said, yeah, absolutely, we're ready. He's got a nice room. We have a good tutor. Apparently his English is very good. We're looking forward very much to having him at the Japanese embassy. Well, it's just we want to be sure you understand. You're calling him Crown Prince. Of course, that is his title. But you do realize that his father in our country is not thought of just as an emperor, but as God. Do you understand that? The warden of Magdalen College said, I think you'll find we're quite used to having the sons of famous people at Oxford. Anyway, don't know what brought that on. Don't know quite what made me go to that direction. Anyway, there's nothing secular about an empire whose military ideology, by the way, was that of Zen Buddhism, for those of you who think the Eastern path is more contemplative. Its official ideology, as with the dictatorship in Burma today, is Zen Buddhism. There's nothing secular about that. So I think that clears up this frequently asked question on that side of the ledger. Moving, still answering my own, not my own question, the other person's question. Moving to Russia, until 1917, the year of the revolution, millions and millions of Russians have been told for hundreds and hundreds of years that the head of their state was also a man of God, was the head of the church, was not quite human, a bit better than human, not quite divine either. The Tsar was the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. He was the little father. As well as owning everyone in the country as an absolute dictator, he was the spiritual leader of the church. That's how millions of Russians have been reduced to credulity, stupidity, servility, and fear. Thus the state of affairs. If you were Joseph Stalin, who'd studied for many years in a seminary to become a priest, and would have made a very good bishop if he'd stuck at it, if you do not realize what an opportunity you've just been given with this vast reservoir, that you shouldn't be in the dictatorship business. Immediately, an inquisition is set up. Heresy hunts begin. Trials of heretics are put on. Miracles are announced. Lysenko's biology will produce giant tomatoes and 4 harvests a year. Everything is to be expected from the leader. All praise is due to him. All thanks are required of you for him. It's not very difficult to see what the analogy is there, and I won't bore you with what happens in China, and I've already told you about North Korea. It's a simulacrum of, a borrowing of, and an inheritance from the willingness of people to take things on faith. Nothing, in my view, secular about that. To my questioner, I reply, sir, or as it might be, ma'am, show me, if you will, a society that has adopted the teachings of Lucretius, Epicurus, Galileo. I'm talking of our great tradition of reason, skepticism, science, culture, religion, and irreligion. Galileo, Spinoza, Einstein, Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, Bertrand Russell. Show me a society that's ever adopted those values as its own, that's fallen into famine, dictatorship, war, cruelty, and persecution, and then we'll have a level playing field. But for now, thank you.
They blame atheism for the worst dictatorships, but that argument falls apart fast. Fascism in Europe was deeply tied to Christian power, Catholic politics, and church-backed authority. The Vatican signed a concordat with Hitler in 1933, giving his regime early international legitimacy. Franco's Spain, Catholic fascism in Croatia, and church-supported right-wing regimes show the same ugly pattern. Religion standing close to dictators when power was available. Even Stalin copied the religious model: heresy trials, sacred leader worship, forced belief, public confession, and punishment for doubt. The poison is not honest skepticism. The poison is blind obedience, whether it wears a cross, a uniform, or a party badge.
American society, probably it's considered a little bit more than Europe, is a society that faces tremendous flux and has for a long, long time. And I was wondering if that is perhaps one reason why you've cited in your book that American society is especially religious. I mean, it struck me that societies in flux, having to deal with that tremendous change, do people turn to religion as an antidote to that change? And if so, that what sorts of things can, not leaning on religion, what sorts of things can we do to substitute for religion in dealing with lots of change?
Well, I think you're partly right, and I think Alexis de Tocqueville had it right also when he pointed out that the great thing about America is religion is a voluntary association. You can't be made to go to a church here. The government can't finance one. I mean, where I was born, which you can probably tell was in England, the Queen is the head of the church, as well as of the armed forces and the state. And on her demise, the instant of her decease, her slobbering, chinless dauphin of a son will not only become the head of the state and the armed forces, but the head of the Church of England. It's enough to make a cat laugh, isn't it? And I have to pay taxes, or would if I still lived there, have to pay taxes to it. That's what you get when you found a church on the family values of fucking Henry VIII. Well, again, ladies and gentlemen, take it from someone who had to sweat and struggle to become a citizen here and go through Homeland Security and the National Security Agency. Realize how lucky you are that doesn't apply to you. Someone who wants to build a church here has to do it themselves and keep it going by their own efforts. And fine, let them by all means do that, as long as they agree to leave the rest of us alone. Now, on the point that you make about anomie, or if you prefer alienation, that was the same point that Durkheim made very early on in his studies of these matters. A huge number of people in history are always having to make something like the transition from the country to the city, from the stable, ordered, rhythmic life that's determined by the seasons to the much more feral conditions of mass society, and that means many more lives will have to be experienced as failures, or at least as very risky. My comprehension of this issue slightly stops there. What I've never understood, and it may be a failure of my imagination, is in what respect does belief in the tooth fairy help you at that point? After all, millions and millions of intelligent workers shrugging off the city, shrugging off the idiocy of rural life and moving to the city, have not run straight to a priest when they run into a crisis. I don't see why people do it. I'm not sure that the explanation we give isn't a condescending one, as a matter of fact. Which, if I'm not babbling too much about this, would enable me to answer another question from my interlocutor that I failed to. What about how when religion makes people behave better? What about Dr. Martin Luther King? That's the one I always get asked. Shall I answer it now? It seems logical. Dr. King was an exemplary human being by every standard that I know. I can't be sure that he was actually a Christian. I can be grateful to the extent that he was not one, in that when he told his oppressed people that he was going to preach from the book of Exodus about the story of the enslaved who made it to the promised land, it's a very good thing he didn't mean it, because that horrible story says that the tribe he's leading are allowed, empowered, in fact, ordered by God to kill everyone who gets in their way, rape their women, massacre their children, sparing only the females of marriageable age, and steal the land and the property of any tribe they don't destroy, or do. Well, just as well that isn't what he was saying, right? Second, you'll remember that he was a student of Marx and of Hegel, and he was regularly accused, rightly too, in his lifetime by the FBI and by the reactionary bigots, of keeping too many friendships among communists and Marxists and socialists, which he did. Great black secularists now forgotten, like Bayard Rustin, my favorite American socialist, and Philip Randolph, the great American black trade unionist, actually organized the March on Washington, had the idea, pulled the crowds together, brought in the trade unions to make it happen. It's a pity that we leave these people out of account, and I think it's condescending, because I think that 90% of the white liberals in this country are in effect saying in a patronizing manner, well, you know, these black folks, they quite like a preacher. They like a preacher man, that's what they respond to. They like the pulpit. That's what they go for. So why not let them have it? Which immediately gives permission for the most gross charlatans and frauds who I've been debating in the last few months, like Sharpton and Jackson, to come forward and just pick it up as if it was theirs, with your, as it were, permission, and prove yet again that you can get away with anything in this country if you can put Reverend in front of your name.
People turn to religion because life feels unstable. Fine. People want comfort during change, loss, fear, and uncertainty. But comfort does not make a claim true. A child may feel safer with a nightlight, but that does not prove monsters are real. Religion sells emotional pain relief, then demands authority in return. America works best when religion stays voluntary. Build your church, fund it yourself, preach to people who choose to listen. The danger begins when private belief tries to become public control. Keep faith out of law, schools, taxes, and government power.
I guess we should just do it alternately, yeah.
Your book was reviewed in New Yorker, and the reviewer brought up a point I thought you might like to address, if you haven't already, that if your view is, would the world be better off without religion at all, he brought up the point that if we're wicked enough to invent religion for ourselves, then we're wicked enough to come up with some other alternative that's just as mischievous.
True enough. I mean, did everyone get the question? Okay. Well, you know why atheists are to be pitied, don't you? They have no one to talk to when receiving a blowjob. So, that if I'm asked, do I wish that religion would die out of the world, I sort of reply, no, I wouldn't have anyone to argue with. I mean, it is, after all, it is the original argument. Where religion ends, philosophy begins, just as where phony cosmological myths end, physics begins. So you have to know what the origins of the argument are. And religion is our first and worst attempt to find out what's going on. We only bother with it because it was here first. It grabbed the territory of explanation, because we are pattern-seeking mammals. We need to look for patterns and for logic, and we prefer, even in times like this, many people will prefer a conspiracy explanation to no theory at all, because they need to have some explanation. Well, religion comes from the time when we didn't know there was a germ theory to explain disease. So it was plague, it was God's will, and a curse. Didn't know we lived on a round planet. Didn't know there were round celestial bodies. Didn't know that our DNA makes us kin with other animals and indeed plants. So the study of it and the debate with it, I think, has to go on. To that extent, I'm in favor of, as the president ludicrously says, teaching the argument about evolution. Because the way I learned it was by reading about the confrontation between Huxley and Wilberforce in London, about the origin of species. Actually, it was in Oxford, in the origin of species. Huxley was Wilberforce's opponent. Wilberforce was the Bishop of Oxford. Huxley was Darwin's best friend, the man who coined the term agnostic. They had a great debate, and Huxley mopped the floor with the spokesman of the church. That's how I know how the argument goes. And in America, admittedly, 50 years later, good grief, but still, the same argument happens in Tennessee, in a courtroom this time. And again, they lose. By all means, teach the argument in that way. You just can't teach it in science class. And by the way, if there's going to be equal time for this stuff, then every church that gets any subsidy from the faith-based initiative, or any tax break, has to teach evolution in Sunday school. By law.
As a fellow anti-theist who is coming to believe more and more that you can't make accommodation with a pack of lies, I decided to give the other side a chance. And at lunchtime, I went to a cathedral right near here, and I saw some people who were sitting there, and they found a place where they didn't feel judged. And I saw two nice young men who were going over there the ceremony for them to become priests and serve their community. And I went home and I read a very charming little story about people in a Muslim village hearing the call to prayer, and the high and the low taking off their shoes, bowing their heads, and coming together. And as an anti-theist, I think it's all very well to say, this is nonsense, what you believe. But what can we do to call the community together? Have you given that some thought?
Sure. Good question. I mean, one of the things that annoys me about the responses that I get sometimes from the faithful is that they say, well, your theory means that love is only a chemical reaction, say. So, well, actually, I do think that there is quite a lot of chemical reaction involved in love, and in some of the things that are associated with it too. But it doesn't mean that one is merely a reductionist. I don't think at all that one must despise the transcendent or the numinous. I wouldn't trust anybody who, say, listening to Mozart on a mountaintop in Cascadia at sunset, didn't feel that maybe there was more to life than his own immediate concerns, and that all could be filled with great compassion for other people. In fact, if this were not so, there wouldn't have been great secular men like Thomas Paine, for example, and Benjamin Franklin, who actually did found the American Anti-Slavery Society, while every Christian in the world was justifying slavery from the Bible, where that justification can in fact be found. Of course there is extraordinary and profound humanism, and without it, where would we be? But I deny only that this is not possible without the fear of a supernatural dictatorship, and I will keep repeating that until the last dog dies. I also have a wager that I put to the religious in these cases, and you may be interested to know that I've tried it with everyone from the guy who founded Bush's faith-based initiative, Mr. Olasky, to various Baptist pastors, a Buddhist nun, a rabbi, charismatic Catholic, various pastors on radio and television all up and down the country. Not yet an answer from them. It's simple. You have to name or cite a moral action performed or a moral statement made by a believer that could not have been made by an atheist. That's all you have to do. And it cannot be done. So your question is a nice one, but it's surplus to requirements. Comrade.
One of your anti-God competitors, Sam Harris, makes the point as a primary thesis in his book, The End of Faith, that real responsibility for the situation which you've been describing is the tolerant religious person who will not take a firm stand and put down erroneous liberal principles. I just wondered whether you would put responsibility on the tolerant religious person as Sam Harris does.
Disease was not a curse. Germ theory explained it. The Earth was not a flat stage under heaven. Astronomy showed a planet in space. Humans were not specially molded apart from life. Genetics shows we share DNA with animals and even with plants. Religion claimed territory before evidence arrived, then called doubt dangerous when science corrected it. That is why religion keeps losing ground. It was humanity's first explanation, but first does not mean best. A cave drawing came before modern medicine too. Nobody should want surgery from the Stone Age. Religion belongs in history class, not science class.
Yes, I mean, I'm a very great admirer of Sam Harris, even though he turns out to be a bit of a Buddhist. I mean, unlike me, he is a qualified neuroscientist, and he does think that there can be consciousness independent of the brain. And that's an argument I'm very interested in having. I doubt he's going to win, but it's a pleasure to argue with him, I have to say. By the way, what does the Buddhist say to the hot dog vendor? Make me one with everything. Just quickly, what happens next? He gets a slathered hot dog and from beneath his saffron robes produces a $20 bill, hands it to the vendor, munches, nothing occurs. He says, "Where's my change?" You know what's coming. Change comes only from within. I'll give you an example of what I mean and why I think that those who criticize me for only taking religion at its worst say, well, you're right about the fundamentalists and the extremists, but what about the mainstream? I say this. Remember last year, the Danish case, where a huge organized attempt was made to destroy the economy of a small democracy in Northern Europe, Denmark, because its prime minister refused to break his own law, the law of his country, to censor cartoons in an afternoon newspaper in Copenhagen. With the backing of all the members of the Arab League, a boycott was declared on Denmark to try and sabotage its economy. Its embassies were burned, its diplomatic immunity was violated in countries where demonstrations are not normally allowed. Random Scandinavians, whether Danish or not, were set upon and murdered. There was a huge outpouring of mayhem and cruelty and bigotry that had quite clearly been very well rehearsed in advance. Bad enough, you might think. Not one media outlet in this country would agree to show those cartoons. In a time completely dominated by the image, my profession, I mean, totally dominated by images, much too much so, they wouldn't show, here's the picture or the pictures that all the fuss is about. Nor would they show them as a gesture of solidarity to their Danish colleagues who were being subjected not to threats of death, but attempts actually to kill them. And when a small magazine, and I know very well why this was, because I know the editors who took the decision, they were either extremely afraid of violent reprisal if they did their job, or, coming closer to your point, they were afraid of offending religious people. I'm not sure which of those decisions is the most cowardly or contemptible. Taken in conjunction, I think extremely contemptible. And a small atheist magazine for which I write, called Free Inquiry, did reprint the cartoons, as a result of which Borders Bookstore pulled our small magazine from the rack. As a result of which I haven't spoken in a Borders Bookstore since I started this tour. Now, in other words, in the heartland of free expression and constitutionally protected free speech, a complete, across-the-board capitulation by everybody and a discrimination against those who were willing to stand up against it. This is very severe. What did the Pope say? Seeing Danes being threatened, Danish economy sabotaged, Danish embassies burned, what did he condemn? The cartoons for being profane. That was the line of the Vatican. That's what our State Department said. It said it regretted the offense given by the cartoons. This is a fantastic surrender. It means the extremists have the whip hand, and we've got no right to say that in criticizing religion, we're only singling out the fanatical or fundamentalist majority. No, in the name of tolerance, your identified phrase, in the name of multiculturalism, in the name of respect, in the name of all these things, they were parodied. And an abject collapse in the face of religious fascism occurred that I, for one, am not going to forget or allow to be repeated. Muted applause for that. Oh, thank you. Not to nudge you too hard in the roast. If people don't applaud, I can become quite morose. Hurt, you know. Not upset, just hurt. Sir.
So, over the course of history, what happened or what is in place that enables billions of people across this planet to believe that a book built by a process as intensely political as that of the Bible is the way that we should live our lives? And how is it that the same people can dismiss particular parts of the Bible, for instance, the book of Joshua, and still say that that book is the absolute authority, the word with a capital W?
Yeah, well, there's a good, there are possible, I think, decent anthropological answers to that. For a long time, it was the only book everyone knew. And for a long time, there was a heroic struggle, at least I regard it as heroic, to have this incredibly important text, the only one everyone had in some way in common, translated into English, out of Latin, so it wouldn't be the special property of a priestly class. And that's what the Protestant Revolution means to me, is John Milton, for example, and William Tyndale and the others who strove to get this book into the hands of the common people to demystify it, to make it into what it is, at least in its King James version, very great literature, as is the Cranmer Prayer Book. You probably know of the lady governor of Texas who, in the discussion on whether religious education should be bilingual in her state, said, well, if English good enough for Jesus, good enough for me. Which means that the Protestant Revolution succeeded even better than I had thought in giving this impression. And English is the only language in which I have to say I understand the Bible. But for many people, it's the only book they have either read or, in many cases, only read a bit of. Now, what you get now as a result of biblical criticism and scholarship, and also various vernacular editions of it, that, unlike the Quran, have made it available to everybody in pretty much every tongue, is people want to take it a la carte. They'll say, I quite like the Beatitudes, I just don't like, I don't mind the story of the rest of the story of the Sermon on the Mount, or the miracle at Cana where water is turned into wine, my personal favorite. But I don't like the other stuff. And I don't like the book of Joshua, and I don't like the injunction to kill all the Midianites down to the last child. That makes me uneasy. Well, they're out of luck. This stuff is either the Word of God or it isn't. And they have to make up their minds whether they think it's that or man-made. And when they've done that, they'll feel...
When religion is criticized, the peaceful majority often asks everyone else to be quiet. The Danish cartoon controversy proved the point. A newspaper published drawings, and the reaction turned into boycotts, burned embassies, threats, and violence. Instead of defending free speech, major institutions blamed the cartoons for causing offense. That is how religion wins without proving anything. It makes fear expensive and honesty dangerous. Christianity plays the same game with the Bible. Believers quote the comforting parts, then dodge the ugly parts. But Numbers 31 orders violence against the Midianites, and Joshua describes conquest in God's name. So which is it? God's word or human writing? They cannot claim divine authority only when the verse sounds nice.
Better. But the attempt to have it a la carte is to me contemptible. I keep finding on this trip when I debate people, I'd have to write a different book for every priest I debated. Because if you say to a Baptist, even in Georgia, well, sir, you say you're an ordained Baptist minister and indeed a teacher of baptism at the local college. May I know whether you concur with John Calvin and his view of predestination and damnation or not? May I further know if you think it applies to me? And if you don't think so, may I know on what authority you don't think it? They don't like the question one bit. They don't. And not because you're in front of an educated audience either. They're not sure what they think. They'd rather say, well, some of that's metaphorical. What's metaphorical about telling people that their fate was decided before they were born and they can't change it even by good works? Even by doing the right thing, won't change it. You were picked for hell before you were born. You're a goat, not a sheep. By the way, who wants to be a sheep? A religion that calls itself a flock, you already know a lot about. They don't like it, ladies and gentlemen. They really don't. I say to the rabbi, so your daily prayers begin, don't they, by saying, thank God he didn't make me a woman or a Gentile, a goy. Isn't that the prayer? Well, I don't always say it, okay. I'm glad to hear it. You come from a sect that doesn't shake hands with women, I'm not going to shake hands with you. I have views of my own about this, but I've told you what they are, and I'm willing to be tested on them and questioned on them. Why aren't you? Why do you want it a la carte all the time? This morning, the Conservative guy, very nice, extremely nice fellow, on the local Fox radio, John someone. Yeah, extremely courteous, gave me a lot of time, and I said, well, for example, I say to Catholics, come on, you may say you're a Catholic, you don't really believe in the virgin birth. He said, well, I do. And I thought, oh, Christ, that's the first one I've met it had to be this morning. And I said, well, are you really saying you do? He said, yes, I absolutely do. I believe in the Immaculate Conception of Jesus. And I said, no, hold on a second. The Immaculate Conception is not the same as the virgin birth. He said, it isn't? No, the Immaculate Conception says that Mary was conceived without sin, without any stain, not that her son was conceived without the intervention. But bluntly, he had no idea. Didn't even know what he didn't believe. It's come to something when a Catholic on Fox TV has to be told his theology by me. And I hope he doesn't. I hope if he hears of this, he doesn't regard it as an abuse of his hospitality. I must say he was a real gentleman to me the rest of the time. So, who's up, sir?
Thank you. Earlier, when you first started speaking, you spoke about fascism. I think it was Aimé Césaire who talked about the relationship between colonial expansion and fascism. Basically, he was stating that because of European expansion, colonialist, that fascism was a result, and that's why they got the rise of fascism in Europe. I was wondering what your thoughts were in that United States, all of our wars except World War II essentially have been colonialist expansion, and now we're seeing the disappearance of habeas corpus and our constitutional rights and torture and those kinds of things. I was wanting to know, particularly in lieu of your new citizenship, how you felt about that.
Thank you. I'm an admirer of the work of Aimé Césaire, who the gentleman just mentioned, who was the great poet of negritude, as it was called in French West Africa, under the time of Leopold Senghor, who was, I think, his mentor in this matter. And it's certainly true that the relationship between the rise of fascism in Europe and the decomposition of colonialism in Africa is a very intense one. Just to give you one example, the brown shirts of the German Nazi Party were bought as army surplus from the Goering family, which had a huge estate in southwest Africa, now Namibia, where General von Trotha had first launched his campaign of extermination against the Herero people, before even the First World War, where they already had, first, the experience of genocide, and second, a lot of spare uniforms that could be used to fit out a horrible militia. And Mussolini's fascism was felt much more intensely in Libya and in the gassing of the people of Abyssinia, as it was then called, Ethiopia now, than it was anywhere else. And you could make the British Union of Fascists largely grew out of the Black and Tan movement that was an attempt to repress the people of Ireland. Interestingly, by the way, the Pope's support of Mussolini in Abyssinia was partly because though the Abyssinians were and are the oldest practitioners of Christianity in Africa, they nonetheless practiced the monophysite heresy, which was thoroughly condemned by the Council of Chalcedon in the year 524. So he had it in for them still on this point. Yes, you're right. As to the thing that you tack on at the end, I knew someone was going to try this. I'm only here to sell my book, okay? But you do have the honor of addressing someone who is a named plaintiff in the lawsuit brought with the help of the American Civil Liberties Union against the National Security Agency and against the Justice Department. Which has so far carried in the courts saying that it is illegal and unconstitutional to listen to the telephone conversations of an American without a warrant. I'm appalled that when I wasn't even a citizen yet, I had to go to law to uphold that simple point. But we've won so far. But it's going to require a lot of vigilance to keep winning. The recent, I think, complete collapse of the Justice Department's witnesses and main spokesman on other matters in front of major hearings in the Senate is extremely encouraging. When we brought the suit, we didn't know that people were gathering around John Ashcroft's bedside trying to guide his palsied hand over this order. Ashcroft, the man who says in this country, remember this, when he was a senator, he said, in America, we have no king but Jesus. A statement that is exactly 2 words too long.
Ask believers one clear question and the confidence starts cracking. If the Bible is perfect, why do so many Christians suddenly call the ugly parts metaphor? Predestination says your fate can be decided before birth, before choice, before action. That makes justice meaningless. Then look at the treatment of women. Religious systems have long built male authority into prayer, doctrine, and daily life. Even basic Catholic terms like virgin birth and immaculate conception get confused by believers themselves. That tells you the truth. Religion demands loyalty before understanding. It survives because people defend labels they often cannot explain. So here's the question. If religion needs fear, guilt, and authority to defend itself, is it really truth or control? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more breakdowns like this, make sure to like and subscribe.